You'd think clothes are harmless, but sometimes fashion nearly kills people. In this episode, 33 times fashion nearly killed people. We're counting the worst offenders. From poison gowns to deadly beauty trends, fashion has come terrifyingly close to killing people. We'll jump through times and places where style nearly turned fatal for ordinary people. You'll see how high fashion quietly killed workers, hurt queens, and nearly broke influencers. Some of these outfits nearly ended lives in ballrooms, factories, and hospital wards. Other times, tiny beauty hacks almost killed people slowly, one trend at a time. By the end, you'll never look at your favorite fashion the same way. So before you lace up, squeeze in, or bleach out, watch this first. The arsenic green Victorian dresses that slowly poisoned fashionable women. That shimmering emerald ball gown was quietly dosing its wearer. In Victorian Europe, dressmakers loved pigments like Chile's green. The dye's arsenic content rubbed off on skin and sweat. Women reported headaches, sores, vomiting, and strange ulcers wherever fabric touched. Shopgirls handling bolts of green cloth fared even worse. Some collapsed at work, their fingernails stained a ghostly green. Doctors eventually connected the mysterious rashes to arsenic-laced fashion dyes. Newspapers printed warnings, yet rich clients still ordered poisonously chic gowns. Only after safer synthetic greens arrived did arsenic ball gowns disappear. Tight-laced Victorian corsets that crushed organs and collapsed lungs. Elegant portraits rarely show the women fainting behind those corsets. In 19th century Britain and America, tight-lacing signaled refinement and discipline. Fashion magazines bragged about waists squeezed to 19 or 16 inches. One London physician compared the X-rays to armor crushed inwards. Women reported indigestion, miscarriages, and passing out at dances and churches. Yet society moms still boasted about daughters' shrinking waist measurements. By the early 1900s, reformers finally shamed tight-lacing out of fashion. Modern waist trainer selfies are basically the same story in Lycra. Chinese foot binding and lotus shoes that crippled generations of women. Some of history's tiniest shoes required some of its worst pain. For centuries in China, elite families bound girls' feet into lotus shapes. Rot, infection, and missing toes were common, but tiny slippers impressed matchmakers. Girls like Zhang Yunhei later described crawling before learning to walk again. Bound women hobbled through crowded courtyards while servants carried them upstairs. When Western missionaries saw the practice, they launched anti-foot binding campaigns. The New Republic of China officially banned binding in the 1910s. Still, some grandmothers quietly kept lotus shoes hidden in family trunks. Crinoline hoop skirts that turned women into walking fire traps. A fashionable crinoline gave you volume but also turned murderous. Mid-19th century women across Europe loved hoop skirts made from steel cages. The wide frames swept over candles, fireplaces, and unguarded factory machinery. Newspapers reported women engulfed in flames within seconds at crowded parties. In one infamous theater fire, burning fabric helped spread the blaze. Panic made things worse, as hoops trapped women in doorways and aisles. Satirists mocked the skirts, but fire brigades begged for simpler clothes. Gradually, slimmer silhouettes and safer fabrics replaced the lethal cotton cages. The word crinoline stayed cute, the burned bodies behind it mostly forgotten. Trendy solarium tanning beds, turning healthy glow into deadly melanoma. The glowing tan sold as healthy ended up meaning hospital biopsies. From the 1980s onward, salons across Europe and America pushed indoor tanning. Teens bought unlimited minutes, chasing magazine bronze skin year-round. Dermatologists started seeing melanoma diagnoses in people barely past college. Studies eventually showed tanning beds could be as risky as midday sun. Countries like Brazil went as far as banning cosmetic tanning outright. Others slapped age limits and warning labels on every cozy-looking solarium. By then, an entire bronze generation had already paid in scars. Toxic fast fashion factories, where cheap trends literally cost workers' lives. Some fashion disasters never reach the runway. They happen underneath. In 2013, the Rana Plaza garment factory complex collapsed near Dhaka. Over 1,000 workers, mostly women sewing Western brands, were killed. Survivors described ignoring new cracks because managers threatened lost wages. Cheap trend pieces in mall windows were literally stitched in that building. Other fires in Bangladesh and Pakistan showed locked exits and barred windows. Each disaster sparked hashtags, boycotts, and promises of safer supply chains. Yet ultra-cheap clothing still depends on someone working near structural failure. The price tag rarely lists overtime hours, fumes, or collapsing concrete. Radium-laced face creams that made 1920s skin literally glow. Imagine smoothing radioactive cream on your face before bed. In interwar France, brands like Tho Radia sold radium beauty products. Advertisements promised glowing skin, extra energy, and a scientifically perfect complexion. Posters even showed women lit from below by imaginary atomic rays. Tiny amounts of radium in jars looked harmless on pharmacy shelves. But workers handling luminous paints and medicines developed jaw necrosis and cancers. As lawsuits mounted, regulators quietly pushed radioactive cosmetics off the market. Collectors today still find intact jars ticking faintly on Geiger counters. They're museum pieces now, not something you'd smear on crow's feet. Mercury-treated felt hats that drove fashionable hatters slowly mad. The phrase, "mad as a hatter," wasn't just Victorian shade. Hat makers in Britain and America used mercury nitrate on rabbit fur. The chemical helped felt fibers mat, producing fashionable top hats and bowlers. Workers inhaled mercury vapor daily in cramped, poorly ventilated workshops. Over time, they developed tremors, mood swings, and slurred, stumbling speech. Doctors called the condition erethism, but customers just noticed odd behavior. Some hatters grew paranoid or depressed, unable to work steadily anymore. By the early 20th century, new processes finally cut mercury from production. The stylish top hat survived. The shaken craftsman behind it often didn't. Queen Elizabeth I led makeup mask that ate her face. Queen Elizabeth I's flawless portraits hide a seriously toxic secret. After smallpox scars, she reportedly turned to Venetian ceruse, a lead-based foundation. The paste mixed white lead with vinegar to create opaque whiteness. Applied daily, it cracked skin, caused hair loss, and darkened teeth. Courtiers copied the look, layering powder over already damaged complexions. Some historians suspect chronic lead poisoning worsened the queen's later health. Even servants dusting wigs and collars inhaled stray particles floating indoors. Ironically, the signature mask of youth may have accelerated aging dramatically. Lead-based powders lingered in European makeup boxes long after Elizabeth was gone. Ancient Roman lead powder cosmetics slowly poisoning high society women. Long before Elizabeth, Roman elites were already dusting on danger. Wealthy Roman women used cerussa, a white cosmetic made from lead carbonate. They prized ghost-pale faces, even as the makeup slowly damaged skin. Archaeologists have found cosmetic jars still lined with chalky lead residue. Doctors like Pliny the Elder already complained about cosmetics harming users. Yet recipes kept circulating, mixing lead with vinegar, oils, and perfumes. Some women even slept in masks to let the paste work overnight. Chronic exposure likely contributed to anemia, neuropathy, and mysterious early deaths. The ideal of marble skin came uncomfortably close to reality. inside arteries. Deadly belladonna eye drops used to achieve fashionable wide pupils. Want bigger eyes in Renaissance Italy? Pharmacists had a literal poison. Women used belladonna eye drops from the deadly nightshade plant Atropa. A few drops dilated pupils, giving that soft, dark, romantic gaze. Unfortunately, the same alkaloids blurred vision and could trigger hallucinations. Regular users complained of headaches, dry mouths, and pounding, irregular heartbeats. Some accounts describe women stumbling through candlelit salons, half-blind from drops. Doctors eventually realized eye nerves and the heart were both affected. Safer makeup trends finally replaced literally poisoning your pupils for beauty. But the phrase doe-eyed still hides that poisonous origin story. Edwardian father-killer collars that could strangle men in their sleep. Sometimes the most dangerous accessory was a simple, detachable collar. Around the early 1900s, American men loved stiff, heavily starched shirt collars. Nicknamed father killers, they pressed hard against the neck and arteries. Newspapers told stories of men collapsing after sleeping in tight collars. Doctors warned that if a man fainted, the collar could suffocate him. Still, business culture demanded those razor-sharp silhouettes for respectable office wear. Some men discreetly loosened their ties and buttons once meetings ended. Over time, softer attached collars quietly replaced the lethal laundry-starched bands. The dramatic nickname survived long after the real chokers left wardrobes. Hobble skirts so tight women fell off moving streetcars. Fashion literally tied women's legs together in the hobble skirt craze. Around 1910, slim skirts narrowed so much that walking became shuffling. Some designs even used cords or bands around the knees for shape. In Paris, a woman reportedly tripped at a racetrack and was killed. In New York, others fell boarding streetcars, getting caught under wheels. Newspapers alternated between mocking and warning, running cartoons of toppled socialites. Transit companies even introduced special low-step streetcars to accommodate the trend, dedicated to action scenes, sensitive and finality. Within a few years, the fad vanished, replaced by looser wartime styles. The phrase hobble skirt stayed behind as shorthand for fashion-induced limitation. Towering, perfumed hairstyles that caught fire from candles and fireplaces. Those cartoonishly tall 18th century wigs were more fire hazard than hair. In France and England, aristocrats wore poofs piled high with padding. Hairdressers added feathers, ships, fruit, and even live caged birds sometimes. The structures were so tall women dodged door frames and low chandeliers carefully. Candlelit rooms meant one careless lean could set pomade and powder blazing. Anecdotes describe wigs catching fire at theaters and crowded card parties. Some women reportedly slept sitting up to preserve elaborate arrangements for days. Servants sometimes used special scratchers because washing the constructions was impossible. Eventually, styles dropped in height, but the legend of flaming wigs stuck. Celluloid hair combs and accessories that could explode or ignite. Early plastic combs promised modern glamour and instead sometimes exploded on heads. Celluloid, a first-generation plastic, was cheap, glossy, and extremely flammable. Women wore ornate combs in thick hair near gas lamps and stoves. In several reported cases, combs overheated, ignited, and literally exploded apart. One victim was thrown backward as burning fragments set clothes alight. Factories making celluloid goods also suffered catastrophic fires and deadly explosions. Despite the risks, manufacturers marketed combs as safe modern upgrades from tortoiseshell. Gradually, safer plastics replaced celluloid, especially for anything worn near hair. Today, surviving pieces sit behind museum glass instead of vanity mirrors. Flammable rayon party dresses that burst into flames near cigarettes. That slinky mid-century rayon party dress could act like lighter fluid. Rayon and early acetate fabrics draped beautifully, but ignited frighteningly fast. Newspaper reports described dresses flashing over in seconds, leaving deep burns. Dance halls, theaters, and holiday parties suddenly became scenes of chaos. Fire safety campaigns urged slimmer skirts and warned against torch evening gowns. Later fabric standards pushed manufacturers to slow-burning blends and safer linings. Still, vintage fashion collectors today check labels before wearing originals to parties. That glamorous sheen in old photos once helped burn Wardsville. 1950s, children's pajamas, so flammable laws had to ban them. Parents once tucked kids into pajamas that practically behaved like kindling. In the mid-20th century, many children's sleepwear fabrics ignited very quickly. Household cigarettes, matches, and heaters turned loose nightgowns into sudden firestorms. Tragic stories of toddlers burned in bedroom fires horrified investigators and lawmakers. Regulators later required flame resistance, leading manufacturers to treat fabrics with chemicals. One widely used chemical, brominated trees, was eventually banned as carcinogenic. So families first faced fires, then questions about long-term toxin exposure. Today, children's pajamas must either fit snugly or meet strict flammability standards. The cheerful rocket prints sometimes hide a long history of regulatory panic. Theater costumes dusted with asbestos fibers for safety, seeding future cancers. To stop theater fires, designers literally wrapped performers in future lung disease. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, asbestos looked miraculous. It resisted flames, so costume makers dusted garments and props with fibers. Some fireproof capes and tunics were woven from almost pure asbestos. Stagehands shook snow and dust off costumes, filling backstage air with particles. Decades later, actors and crew began developing mesothelioma and other cancers. Investigations traced many cases back to old fireproof curtains and outfits. Museums now treat vintage asbestos costumes like hazardous waste, not nostalgic props. The miracle mineral once meant safety awards. Later, it meant courtroom payouts. Bright aniline clothing dyes linked to bladder cancers in garment workers. Vivid Victorian colors didn't just stain cloth, they stained workers' bladders. Synthetic aniline dyes let mills churn out brilliant purples and reds. Dye workers spent shifts splashing in vats of chemical-laden liquids. By the late 1800s, German doctors noticed unusual bladder cancers among dyers. Investigations eventually singled out certain aromatic amines as powerful carcinogens. Some countries later banned specific dye intermediates, forcing factories to reformulate. Meanwhile, customers kept enjoying jewel-toned dresses with no idea about workers' diagnoses. Modern safety rules now require protective gear, ventilation, and strict chemical monitoring. Those vintage color charts quietly hide decades of lab reports and funerals. Coal tar hair dyes sold as glamorous, while quietly raising cancer risk. A permanent hair color once came with quietly permanent health questions. Early 20th century dyes used coal tar chemicals to lock pigment into hair. Salon workers and frequent users bathed their scalps in aromatic amines regularly. Animal studies later showed some of these compounds could trigger cancers. Regulators debated warning labels while companies quietly swapped out certain ingredients. Large studies now suggest a modest cancer risk for heavy users. Meanwhile, hair color advertisements still promise confidence, youth, and professional polish. For many stylists, gloves, ventilation, and shorter contact times became non-negotiable. The makeover chair remains glamorous, even if the chemistry underneath got complicated. Skin bleaching creams packed with mercury that slowly poisoned their users. Skin lightening jars promising brightening have literally hospitalized users worldwide. Many unregulated creams contain inorganic mercury, a powerful neurotoxin and kidney poison. Women from California to Nigeria have presented with tremors and memory loss. Some develop severe rashes and hypertension from creams stored in shared bathrooms. Family members, including children, sometimes absorb mercury just from touching contaminated surfaces. Authorities periodically seize thousands of jars from small shops and online sellers. Still, colorism pressures and viral before and after photos keep demand stubbornly high. Dermatologists try steering patients towards safer treatments and away from mystery imports. The prettily labeled tube in a suitcase can hide industrial-grade toxins. Black henna fashion tattoos that left chemical burns and scarring. Those cheap vacation henna tattoos sometimes leave more than memories behind. Natural henna stains skin brown. So-called black henna often isn't henna. Vendors mix in PPD, a hair dye chemical that can burn skin. Tourists from Turkey to Bali returned with blistered, raised designs and scars. Doctors report sensitized patients can no longer safely use hair dye. Parents often describe thinking it was harmless fun at a resort booth. Only days later do the weeping, chemical burns appear along the pattern. Public health campaigns now warn travelers to avoid anything labeled black henna. The safest temporary body art still comes from simple brown plant paste. Contact lenses worn only for color, causing blinding infections. Sometimes the scariest part of a Halloween costume is the contact lenses. Colored lenses sold in novelty shops often bypass proper fitting and prescriptions. Wearers share them with friends, sleep in them, and add makeup. Eye doctors see corneal scratches, ulcers, and infections that threaten permanent vision. One woman needed emergency care after cheap store lenses nearly blinded her. Tests on counterfeit lenses even found bacteria similar to sewer water samples. Regulators now classify all contact lenses as medical devices requiring supervision. Yet every October, online ads still push glowing, cat eye, and zombie styles. Ophthalmologists would rather you skip them than trade costume likes for eyesight. Ultra-high stiletto heels that snap ankles and shatter wrist bones. Those killer stilettos sometimes live up to the marketing, just literally. Post-war designers in the 1950s pushed ever thinner, higher metal heels. Women teetered across cobblestones, subway grates, and office carpets on needle points. Emergency rooms saw sprained ankles, broken wrists, and falls downstairs. Heel tips sometimes punched straight through theater stages and ballroom floors mid-step. Office building managers posted signs banning spiked heels from delicate lobby tiles. Still, stilettos became symbols of power, glamour, and high-fashion discomfort. Later, chunkier heels and platforms would cycle back when ankles needed mercy. But the phrase, killer heels, never really went out of style. Extreme waist trainers reviving corset organ damage in modern influencers. Modern waist trainers basically brought Victorian tightlacing to Instagram and reality television. Celebrities posted dramatic before and after selfies wearing latex corsets for hours. Followers bought similar devices, cranking laces tighter to chase cartoon curves. Doctors started seeing fainting, reflux, and bruised ribs in dedicated users. Some complained of numbness from compressed nerves and difficulty taking full breaths. Fitness experts pointed out you can't permanently move ribs without surgery. Yet companies marketed trainers as shortcuts to snatched waists without hard workouts. Over time, the trend cooled, replaced by core-strength workouts and shapewear. But every few months, another viral video tries squeezing the idea back. Heavy metal-laced lipsticks, women literally ingested for a century. Every lipstick swipe puts color on lips and trace metals inside you. Studies sampling popular brands have repeatedly found small amounts of lead. Cadmium, chromium, and other metals sometimes hitchhike in pigments and fillers. Regulators set limits, but products from some markets still exceed recommended levels. Because lipstick sits on the mouth, users slowly ingest tiny daily doses. Over years, that exposure adds to whatever metal burden already exists. Most people never notice anything dramatic, just like with old leaded gasoline. Health groups now push for cleaner formulations and better testing of imports. Meanwhile, makeup bags around the world quietly rattle with little metal-laced bullets. Victorian mourning veils dyed with toxic blacks inhaled all day. Even grief had a dress code, and it wasn't exactly healthy. In Victorian Britain, widows wore heavy black crepe veils for extended mourning. The stiff fabric was dyed with sooty, often chemically harsh black pigments. Women breathed through this curtain daily, at funerals, church, and social calls. Some complained of coughs, headaches, and skin irritation wherever the veil rubbed. Social rules sometimes demanded full mourning for a year, or even longer. Dress reformers argued veils trapped soot and city pollution near lungs. Gradually, lighter fabrics and shorter mourning periods replaced the oppressive black cages. But the image of a veiled widow still defines Victorian sorrow. Poisonous Paris green artificial flowers used as fashionable hair ornaments. If the dress didn't poison you, the bouquet in your hair might. Victorian women wore artificial flowers and leaves colored with Paris green. The copper arsenic compound shed dust onto hair, skin, and gloves. Hairdressers complained of burning fingers and sore throats after long workdays. Women developed sores behind ears, where the bright leaves rubbed constantly. In some factories, girls assembling the decorations developed chronic vomiting and ulcers. Newspaper exposés eventually showed piles of discarded green scraps labeled as poisonous. Public outrage slowly pushed arsenic pigments out of hats, wreaths, and trims. Yet the fashionable arsenic green ghost still haunts costume museum displays. Poison-tipped feathered hats that spread disease and decimated bird populations. Those extravagant feathered hats once cost more bird lives than anyone realized. Hunters slaughtered egrets and other wading birds just for breeding season plumage. Contemporary reports estimated millions of birds killed yearly to supply millinery showrooms. Rotting carcasses often stayed in rookeries, spreading disease among remaining chicks. Some species, like the snowy egret, nearly vanished from certain wetlands completely. Boston activists Harriet Hemingway and Minna Hall organized boycotts against plume hats. Their campaign helped launch the Audubon movement and early bird protection laws. Eventually, a simple felt cloche replaced the murderous clouds of feathers. Gargantuan bustles and bustle wires that snagged in machinery and carriages. The Victorian bustle made backs fashionable and sometimes dangerously bulky. Women wore metal and whalebone frames under skirts to create dramatic rear silhouettes. In factories and workshops, those protruding cages snagged on gears and belts. Newspaper accidents mention women dragged toward moving machinery by hooked bustles. On crowded city streets, frames caught on carriage steps and omnibus rails. Even sitting down required careful choreography to avoid bending or breaking wires. Some dress reform advocates used workplace injuries to argue for simpler clothing. Gradually, fashion slimmed towards sleeker skirts as the century closed. The exaggerated backside moved from factory floors into costume dramas and museums. Floor-length trains that dragged filth and infection through city streets. A long train looked regal indoors and disgusting on 19th century streets. Urban roads overflowed with horse manure, spit, and all kinds of waste. Floor-length hems and trains dragged through gutters, then swept into parlors. Doctors worried about tuberculosis and other germs hitchhiking on damp fabric. Mothers sometimes scolded daughters for letting babies crawl on infected skirts. Some clever designs added small loops so women could hoist trains up. Nonetheless, Etiquette insisted proper ladies keep skirts sweeping gracefully behind them outdoors. Shorter hemlines only became respectable once women started cycling and working. After that, more filth stayed on sidewalks instead of entering parlors. Early elastic corsets and girdles causing blood clots on long journeys. 20th century girdles promised freedom of movement while quietly pinching blood vessels. Manufacturers replaced whalebone with elastic panels, rubber, and metal stays. Women wore them daily to work, then during long train journeys. Doctors noticed tight garments plus long sitting often meant swollen, painful legs. Some suspected the combination could raise the risk of blood clots. Later, similar concerns echoed around long-haul flights and deep vein thrombosis. Travel advisories began recommending stretching, walking aisles, and looser waistbands on journeys. Shapewear companies now emphasize graduated compression and circulation-friendly designs in marketing. Plenty of travelers still secretly unbuckle shapewear once the cabin darkens,